course, there's always going to be weird scenarios based on individual conditions, but generally speaking, there are some rules to follow that can predict how buildings will behave in most cases, right? Except for occupant behavior is always the wild card. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by TDS Operations Manager and Fine Homebuilding Contributing Editor Ian Schwant.
Hello, everyone.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Gerton.
Hello.
And our producer and Senior Editor Jeff Rose.
Hello.
Please email me your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Guys, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Boy, it's a beautiful day here in Connecticut. Mike, where are you at this morning?
Oh, I'm still in Arizona, and that's probably 35 out. It's cool, but it's going to be up to probably 68 or so. So looking forward to that.
So, do surfaces get slick at night from radiant cooling? I mean, is there any moisture that can condense on stuff?
So that is a good. I'm glad you asked that question because it's funny how you can extrapolate building science and the things you learn there about thermodynamics, radiational cooling, and all that to just the outdoor environment. So even though it might be 35 or 38 out when I walk outside in the morning, my car and my truck have frost over the entire top. So that, I think, is due to that completely clear sky and the radiational cooling and that cold surface attracting what little moisture there might be in the air and then frosting over. So I'm out there scraping my windshield in the morning if I've got to go somewhere.
Does it make the sidewalk, which is ground coupled and because of that has a lot of thermal mass, is that slick too?
Nope,
No,
not that I've found. Nope. The ground surfaces are pretty much clear of anything. In fact, the frost line is like about that deep. It's like a quarter of an inch. You might get a little, scratch the top, and that's about it. But the ground temperature, and I can tell. Because the house is on a slab and there's no insulation, and the surface temperature of that slab in the house is always about 64, 65 degrees, which is kind of nice.
That's why people live there, am I right?
Well, the nice thing, and I noticed when I've been here in, August and September, is that because the slab is still at that 64, 65, even though, the room might be 77, 78 degrees, in the middle of the afternoon, no air conditioning running when it's 100 something out, that you're losing your body heat to that slab. So it's almost like a radiant cooling system. Radiant cooling has been tried in commercial buildings and some residential. In other parts of the country, it doesn't work very well because it becomes a condensing surface for the humidity in the air. But when you have low humidity, having a cool slab is a nice way to cool your body, especially if you're in shorts and a t-shirt.
Interesting. So is the bedroom remodel continuing? Is that wrapped up? What's on your home improvement list?
Oh, so I had to wrap that up because my mother and her partner were showing up about a week and a half ago. So I wrapped that up for the most part so we could move in just hours before they arrived. The only thing left there is to put the doorknobs on the bathroom, and I got to outfit my office. But I'm still working in an extra bedroom right now. But otherwise, yeah, came out good. It's a pleasure to walk into a nice, when you finally kind of got it finished, and then it's that last little bit of putting the bed in, putting all the little throw rug on the floor, and putting the little tables up next to the bed. It finishes it. Until then, it's just this big hollow white room with flooring. And then you throw in the furniture, and boom, it's done.
Ian, what do you have to report? Have you been working on your place? It's been pretty cold around here. Have you gotten this cold snap too?
It's 45 degrees here today. We're in the middle of fake spring, as we like to call it here. No, I haven't been doing much outside stuff, but I did get a sudden burst of drive to start working on the interior of the house. I sent you guys my sketch up of our kitchen island that Madam Architect, my wife, approved over the weekend, and we'll put into production when I can find walnut plywood somewhere. So,
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions. Okay, so you're buying plywood and you're going to make this where?
I'll make it in the garage shop. I just pull the cars out and then wheel the tools and setup out. And if it's not going to snow, I can leave the cars out or clean up and wheel everything back in. But lately I've been doing work on Saturdays and Sundays, and I just leave the vehicles out in the driveway and leave the shop set up. And
The island looks
two-car
ginormous.
garage.
How many sheets of plywood is this, and how many boxes?
So I was going to make it all as one piece, and then probably use a lot of solid walnut because I can get that pretty reliably from a really good lumber yard that's only about 15 minutes from my house. So I'll do a fair amount of it out of that. But like the base of the floor of the cabinet, I'll do out of walnut plywood, and then some of the dividers where you'll see little sections of with open shelving.
This seems like a pretty good Fine Homebuilding article. Has anyone talked to you about this?
No one's talked to me about it. No one knew it was even a thing.
Don't tell anyone else.
No, we won't tell anyone else. I don't know. I woke up one day and was like, so what do you want for a kitchen island? I feel like building the kitchen island, and then that spiraled out of control quickly.
Well, I can
shelves-
tell. It's
Will the shelves I'm looking at the renderings, will the shelves be fixed shelves in all of those little like cubby holes, or will they be adjustable?
Yeah, they'll all be fixed. It'll be just a fixed grid of shelves, and then I'll probably tier them because she has different sized cast iron cookware pieces that she wants to display, and she has a few that are really tall, large pots, a tagine, things like that will go on the bottom, and then smaller Dutch oven pots in the middle and more pan style things on top. And
how much
we should tell
time did
folks
that take? How much time did it take to like figure, okay, this piece will go here, so we need this measurement, and that kind of designing to fit your belongings, the kitchen appliances and things.
So she has them all displayed right now on this little IKEA bookshelf. So I just sat down in front of them at the table and got the tape out and was like, okay, there's a bunch that are 12 inches to 10 inches, so we'll go with 12. And there's a bunch that are 10 and 7 inches, so we'll go with 10, and just kind of did it that way.
We should tell folks what you're talking about is La Cruzette. It's a cast iron cookware from, I think it's French, right?
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It comes in amazing colors. Yeah, it's beautiful
and
stuff.
My wife is not the kind of kitchen person who has all the same color. So she's got the full rainbow coalition of cast iron cookware.
Jeff, do you have anything to report? What's going on at your place?
Not a whole lot. Just trying to reprogram my garage door openers, which has been just like one of those things that should be stupidly simple and is becoming the bane of my existence.
So you got new controllers that are not working with the opener? Is that what I understand?
Yeah, because basically I get one working and it disables another one, and just it's crazy.
You guys are both nodding. Is this a common problem? Yeah?
Yep.
I've never had a garage door opener in my life, so.
You have a
Do you
child.
have a garage?
I'm broadcasting from it, Mike.
No, Mike, he calls that his house now.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah. So Patrick, you were at the builder show and you brought something home.
I don't want to talk about it too much, but me and probably thousands of other people got sick at the builder show. I I tested positive for COVID. I'm very lucky. I'm not too ill so far, but yeah, if anyone thinks it's not out there, you'd be wrong. It's a lot of people in a closed space, all shaking hands. It seemed very much like it was before the pandemic started. So
You
I
were
tell
out
you what,
there
it was
shaking
fun
babies and
while it
kissing
lasted.
hands, and
Oh man, I was
So you're
real
living in your
careful.
garage. You're living in your garage right now to isolate from Liam
Yeah,
and
I don't want to give it
Carol.
to the rest of the family. So Carol has a trip in a couple weeks to Seattle for the Flower and Garden Show,
Yes.
and
So don't give it to her.
you're traveling there too, Jeff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can't give that to. And Liam is traveling along with her as a getaway and his birthday present for his 17th birthday. So yeah, super bad timing. Fortunately, I'm not, deathly ill, which is still a thing. You guys saw my my photo I sent to you this morning of Liam's accomplishment. He passed his driver's test. You guys have heard me talk about Liam learning to drive on the podcast. Well, he not only passed it, he crushed it. In fact, the examiner wrote excellent with exclamation points and underlines on his examination. Have you ever seen anyone who's gotten perfect score on their driver's test with congratulations from the examiner?
no, I think it's a pass fail thing here, and then living in the Northeast, where I'm pretty sure they don't have driver's education in a few of those states. Not gonna out anyone, New Jersey and Massachusetts.
Yeah, he did a great job, and it was a delight to hear. So he comes back from the test, and I was like, Liam, no one gets like accolades written on their driver's test. I was like, was this examiner a softie? He's like, no, he was a police officer. I think it was for 17 years. So somehow he impressed the jaded examiner, who was explaining to Liam while they were testing all the weird things that student drivers do during the test, including 1 in 10 try to go down a do not enter one-way street. So that's
Do they purposely take them in areas where there are a lot of those mine traps to get around?
That's a good question. And Liam brought that up to me. He's like, so the examiner is telling me that, he reads reviews on social media and by the driver's instruction companies that are trying to recruit students, that the examiners try and trick them. And he's like, no, we are not trying to trick students. We are trying to examine their road readiness. And no, there's no
Through
trickery.
tricking them.
So it's been a crazy week. Lots of stuff happening here at the homestead. Also, lots of stuff happening in the podcast email inbox. This comes from Richard. Another interesting podcast today concerning ridge vents down south. They became popular 40 years ago. A downside is when a hurricane comes along and rips them off, and you find yourself on top of the roof, patching this giant hole in the calm of the eye, a particularly short and dangerous time. Ever since then, no ridge vents for me. Spray foam sealed attic is the way to go down south. For my money, smartwatches with embedded cellular and not dependent on a nearby phone's Bluetooth are the best smartwatch. Direct cellular is limited to the more expensive Apple and Samsung watches. With my $30 phone service, a smartwatch with cellular adds $5 a month. However, I think the technology is still in its infancy, the size is a little extreme, and the battery life is still short. While I don't intend this next comment to be a direct stab, it would seem a bunch of fine home building editors could do a better job of creating clear and concise abstracts from a reader's long and rambling question. Just a thought. Well, that is entirely my fault, Richard. We'll get to your other two comments shortly. But yeah, I'm going to do a better job of editing the questions because, that's what my title is.
But I agree with them in one regard and don't in another. Sometimes it's the wandering descriptions that people have, which we as contractors, it's illustrative of what we as contractors have to analyze all the time. because a lot of customers just kind of ramble on, whether they're talking or writing, and you're kind of like trying to boil it down to what are they really talking about and what are their needs really are. So in one way, it's instructive, I guess.
And that's a great point, Mike. I find myself having to, weed through not just the letters that come in, but other people's descriptions of projects that they're looking for a budget for. And you do have to reach out and grab little parts of it to start assembling what the narrative that they're trying to get to is. And I would imagine you doing some of the question and answer things within the magazine over the years, you have to have ran into this as well. Do you find yourself editing those questions down for the magazine?
We
The
always
interesting
do.
thing about Q&A departments in magazines and media of all types is the question is as important as the answer. And, questions need parameters to be useful. It is definitely a skill. Yeah, it's something that media needs to deal with. What do you guys think about his comments on ridge vents? I've heard the same things, and I've heard that like Dade County, I don't know that you can put a ridge vent on a house as an example. I'm sure there are other places.
Well, be careful what you say about Dade County. Dade County's in Florida. They have the highest wind zones in the United States at, I believe, 150, maybe 160 miles an hour. They have their own testing protocols for all sorts of building materials, which other counties and states will reference as their standard because Dade County is so they want to see verifications from manufacturers and everything. So they do have, and you'll see ridge vent specifically, manufacturers will list their Miami-Dade County approval because it has meaning versus some other ridge vents. And I've seen what happens after hurricanes down in Florida. I was there after Andrew back in '92, and then back down during a few in like 2004-05, and then just recently. And ridge vents can stay on, even when you see shingles and other roofing blowing off other parts of the roof. And I think a lot of it has to do with the installer. It's not necessarily the product. We can't just blanket say ridge vent is a bad idea. But it has to be installed properly. And a lot of roofers, roofing is a commodity replacement roofing. It's a commodity product. And so it's get it in, get it done, get out of there, move on to the next job. Unfortunately, and ridge vent doesn't always get installed as well as it could be.
Yeah, the letter writer immediately made me think back to when I did a little bit of roofing very early in my career, how the specific black plastic ridge vent that we would install and then shingle over actually said on it approved for use in those Florida counties. So there are the right products out there to do it.
The problem with ridge vent in my mind is like it's the last thing to go on the roof and everyone wants to go home and everyone is picking
usually
up
at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's so it wouldn't surprise me that gets little attention or not enough. Good thoughts on smartwatches too, Richard. I didn't even know you could have a smartwatch that was also a phone, which is kind of mind-blowing. Not for me. I would destroy that in about 15 minutes.
You don't want to talk in your wrist like a secret agent?
I've always wanted to do that. This comes from Zach. Hi, Patrick. I heard you mention on the podcast that you had your sediment filter on your well clog up. Sounds like it is a fairly regular occurrence for you. I'm a civil engineer that specializes in water utility projects, especially small water systems. In similar situations, we've installed centrifugal action sand separators. As the name implies, they force the water into centrifugal action, which separates out particles. The particles then be flushed out via a blowdown valve. They are a little pricey, but depending on how often you're replacing filters, it may be cheaper in the long run. Here's an example with a 4 to 10 gallon per minute flow rate. This would need to go between your well and your bladder tank. Best, Zach. Zach, I had no idea these things exist. Pretty cool. Simple concept, right? You spin the water around, it flings out the particles, they collect in a basin. Every once in a while, you blow out the bottom of this canister and the particles come out. Super cool. Mike, have you had any experience with these? No.
I've never heard of them, and what I find is interesting is that circular vortex that's created is the same way a lot of the modern vacuums work, is to circle that the air around so that the particles kind of drop out of the airstream.
Ian, these on any of your project? No.
No,
So
never heard of them, but I do like that Zach knew that you would be cost conscious on whether or not to purchase one.
I love having you on the show, Ian.
It shows that people are really listening and understanding who you are, Patrick. It's great.
So it didn't strike me as bananas expensive. It was $550. That's not terrible. I think
it's a lot of filters,
15.
Patrick. It's a lot of
What's
filters.
That?
It's a lot of filters to replace. And you're so good at taking the cover off now, thanks to Mike's coaching on how to make the cover for that filter come off easier.
It still gives me an anxiety attack every time I have to take that off there. I'm like, okay, is it the right time? Am I going to have to go to the hardware store and buy a new filter housing like I had twice in the past?
Well, those filters aren't cheap either. They're like $20 or more a piece. So $500, if this thing it does the job, you're only talking 20, 30 filter changes, which if you're changing every couple of months, that comes up quick. A couple years, it pays for itself.
I have a question for you guys and our listeners. So my question is, my filter is beyond the well tank. Is the sediment from the well, the sand that's being sucked up in the stream of water, is it damaging to the well tank and its bladder? That's what I expected. Okay,
excellent question.
Zach can maybe answer that.
I thought this was the dial and engineer portion of the show that people have requested, that you had someone who was just going to chime in with the answer.
I haven't heard from Zach, but I did ask him to be on Pro Talk, and maybe if he hears me mention this on the regular podcast, he'll be guilted into doing it. But I think that'd be a very interesting conversation. Everyone has water coming to their house. Lots of people have problems with it. I think it would be a useful and interesting conversation. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I know that you're periodically supposed to drain the tank and kind of clear that stuff out. I don't know that it would be damaging, but I can definitely see how it would silt in over time.
And indeed they do. I've pulled many apart over the years, particularly on wells that are that service wells where the filter is downstream of the tank, and they do sludge up in the bottom to the point where the outlet can be restricted down to a very small orifice. And if you don't pull them out or clean them out, you'll find that the flow just diminishes. You think it's the filter, you replace the filter, you still have low flow. You think it's the pump and everything else, and it ends up just being sediment deposits inside of there. So, yeah, maintenance.
There's so many things that can be. When people complain about their water bill from the utility or the town, I'm like, get over it, because it is a way bigger problem to have on-site water. This comes from Jim, the village handyman. Hello, FHB crew. I want to add my thoughts on phones and watches. My cell phone is invaluable, and I've used one forever to help me in my work. But watches are different. No matter how hard I try, they break. My solution is to use my watch to tell time, nothing more. I buy a cheap $15 or so Casio digital watch on Amazon or at Walmart. Because it's waterproof down to 50 meters, I can soak it in simple green solution to remove accumulated paint. I can use a buffing wheel or leftover pads from my headlight restoration kit to clear up the face when I can no longer see the display. Typically, the watch will last a year or just a bit more. Then I buy another cheap watch and move on. It's a cheap solution that works great for me. Mike, I bet you have a Casio watch. Is it from 1988?
So Casio would be a premium for me. I've got the generic knockoffs, and I only pay $9.99. And I don't wear a watch typically, but when I do trade shows, and everything's timing based when I'm doing demonstrations, and I got to gauge it. So I have a watch. And what invariably happens is I buy a watch for, say, the JLC live show, and come next year when I'm ready to you wear it again, and the battery's dead, and it's not worth the aggravation to find a battery, which costs $5 anyway. I just go and buy another one. So I have a box full of these watches. If anybody has a cheap source of batteries and wants to replace them in all of these old watches, they're welcome to them. I can ship them out to you free of charge.
Oh, that's going to be hard to pass up. So we have a great question coming from Mark, and I'm going to preface this by saying we're going to talk about this more in the after show. But Mark has a small kitchen that he's looking to get remodeled, and you guys saw pictures of Mark's kitchen this morning. Any thoughts before I read Mark's letter? Anyone?
I think you got to do the letter. That sets it up.
Okay, we'll just get to it. We have a very small kitchen, 84 square feet. Most of it is original from the pre-1980s, except for the sink, appliances, and solid surface countertops, which were updated within the last 10 years. We want to update everything else. The walls are made of fiberboard with peeling wallpaper, the ceiling has cracks, and its lighting is horrible. The linoleum floor is also worn out. I think we want to go back to the studs and update the kitchen. We went to several kitchen design stores and are faced with a few issues. 1, some do not even want to take it on because it is too small of a project. 2, others want to update everything even though the countertops and sink are in great condition. Is this a case of small project discrimination? What do we do? I don't want to have some handyman do it if they are not experienced in a full kitchen remodel. Thank you very much. I enjoy the podcast. Mark. P.S. The only thing I will insist on is a range hood that vents outside. I tend to burn most meals. Oh my gosh. So, small project discrimination. What do we think? Mike's nodding.
I don't know if it's quite small product or project discrimination, but for me, anytime someone wants to save portions of the existing condition of a project and work around it is going to be a red flag if you're going to a full service design contractor for this type of project, which is what they really need. I would also think that this project is going to cost way more than anybody think it should to do it back to the studs and do it all the way.
You sent us a sample budget, or it wasn't a sample budget, it was a real budget from a project. It was bananas, Ian, can I just say? A little kitchen with do you want to tell folks about the kitchen and what it costs?
Well, this was a budget that we put out for a kitchen very, very similar in size, and our cost to produce it was over $70,000. And our cost to produce. So
Jeff,
that's no profit or overhead or anything.
Yeah. It's interesting how I have a completely different perspective than Ian because you're working with a full service company. My brother, who does mostly just kitchen and bath remodel and just a one-person operator, he'll bring in the plumber, electrician as needed, but he'll do the flooring, he'll do the tiling, he'll do the countertop, and he'll do the cabinet installs, he'll do all the demo, he'll install the new window, he'll do the ductwork for the exhaust fan. He could probably do it for half of that.
Yep.
Which half is of what your cost is. And he'll still earn what he wants to earn. He bases all of his income on his more or less hourly rate. And he could, do well by it. But finding somebody like my brother is much harder than going to, as Mark did, just going to the storefront kind of remodelers, the full service remodelers.
Yep.
The specialty, yeah.
Jeff, what were you going to say? These numbers seem surprising to you?
I having only ever done this work myself, for myself, kind of hard for me to, wrap my head around it. I'm sure they all the numbers make sense, but my knee-jerk reaction is like, that's crazy. But
it's not a knee-jerk reaction. It's a perfectly sound, on brand for you being the arbiter of practicality reaction. It's that these small kitchens like that are really so similar to the $70,000 or $80,000 bathroom one, which was part of the podcast zeitgeist for several months, right, Patrick? It's a small job that is much better done, like Mike said, by somebody who is going to do nearly the entire project themselves, not require design. It's a much better job for them than it is for a full service design firm.
And Mark, I might suggest what Ian did too, and I'll let Mike take it after this, but the countertops, wanting to save them in the sink, that's a red flag. Like, nobody wants to deal with that. They're not that special, honestly. So I think if you honestly move away from that, you're going to get more reasonable budgets because you're not going to have the PIA factor cost increases, right?
It's not just that, but it outs you as being overly cost conscious for a project that is it's ripe with loads of cost that need to be covered. And unless you're going to go Mike's route that he suggested, you may have 6 or 7 or even 8 different contractors doing work that require management and organization and planning and just layers of administrative costs that that somebody like what Mike's talking about won't have.
And one of the things, maybe we can talk in the after show a little bit about is what you just kind of hinted towards, Ian, there, where you said, or Patrick, when you said the red flag of, you're the homeowner and you say, these countertops are only a few years old. I like the countertops. I like this fixture. I like to save them. Where those are things that communicate to the contractor who you are. And that's something, we could talk more about, is what contractors are thinking when they're coming to look at, because they're not just evaluating the job, they're also evaluating the client when they come out and meet, or when they're qualifying you to see whether you're a good fit for the company. And for Mark, I think that you're not a good fit for the contractors that you're getting in touch with. And I would recommend a lot more digging, a lot more scratching around, a lot more talking to friends, family, neighbors, anybody you can find who's had experiences with a small 1-person or 2-person size contractor, and then getting a price from them. The other thing that I find that contractors, at least the small ones, they don't want to spin their wheels pricing out a job that 4 other people are going to get a price on. Find somebody through a network, just have a conversational discussion with them, not talking numbers. If they're the right scale, right size, talk general numbers. Find somebody you like, somebody you feel you trust, and then have them budget it out. Don't start to do the price options, getting a bunch of different prices and optioning things out, because that just spends a lot of time, unless you're willing to pay a contractor to provide those cost out details.
Do you have anything to add, Ian?
I think
Jeff?
that was excellent advice, and we can talk more in the after show. But I would like to add to the after show conversation about how a homeowner should go about courting and finding the right contractor. I think is maybe more the real crux of what this listener is getting at with the question.
Mm-hmm.
So to paraphrase, the after show is about getting a good fit with your contractor, getting a good fit with your client, right? It's
Yep.
how to make those relationships work. Yeah. I couldn't believe $75K to do a freaking 8x10 kitchen. That's mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing.
Yeah. Cost to produce. So that's not even any overhead and profit for the contractor. But again, that's looking at it from the full service design contractor spectrum. And I would think you'll get plus or minus 10 or 15% on those costs from a variety of different sized contractors, whether it's a small kitchen firm or a lumber yard that also does that as a service. You're going to be in that range.
Well, it should be an interesting after show conversation because I have some other suggestions on how to make this more affordable, Mark, and stay tuned for that. This comes from Domas in Nova Scotia. Hi, FHB Podcast. Big fan of your work. Following your discussions made me a better contractor, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada, climate zone, feels like all of them. Well, he's in climate zone 6, which is, let's just say, cold. Last discussion about vapor/air barriers caused some frustration with this multi-barrier way of building. I think I get the science behind it, and like many of us, obsess about taping versus caulking, hot versus cold side, vapor versus air. We do install 6 mil poly on the warm side and call it a vapor barrier. I've seen that it works from experience. So you guys probably saw the photos that we got, and when you hear me talking about how Canadians detail poly as an air barrier, that this is how they do it, and this, I think it's well done, right? I've seen that it works from experience. I'm also a big fan of self-adhered exterior membranes and very excited about how these building products are developing. So in our projects, when we build new envelopes, additions mainly, we find ourselves air sealing twice and then controlling vapor between the two based on the science applicable to our climate zone. Air sealing on the inside of the envelope is a tough road to walk, and it often feels like you are only one faulty acoustic sealant tube away from a mental emergency. We have the best listeners, I swear. All of this effort is to control vapor around a predetermined constant, which is a hot or cold line based on climate zone. I see that hot and cold lines as a variable and becoming more with changing climate zones. How about instead of trying to control vapor around this elusive target, we eliminate the hot and cold by insulating on both sides of the air barrier, which we're already doing in some cases. Wouldn't a building envelope with one airtight layer and insulation on both sides solve vapor condensation on the cold issue? If this checks out, could this lead to one national standard for airtight envelopes and then local codes for insulation ratios on either side of the air barrier based on heating cooling cycles? I think I would prefer nerding out about that than going down the rabbit hole of air sealing from inside the house. I like the idea of being employable in any climate zone too. Thanks for reading this. Please keep what you're doing. Domas, I hope I said your name right. What do you guys think? Ian, you had some immediate responses. You had an immediate response to this.
I did, yeah. So one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I started designing my house was from Ben Bogey, who pretty much told me, don't go over the top with all of this different material stuff and the fancy, cool kid passive house things. Rain screen on the outside so it ventilates your siding, ventilate the inside of your house, keep your temperature constant, keep your humidity constant. You do those things. You don't have to go down this road of coming up with super complex wall assemblies and the idea to have some standard assembly with your different air control layers and insulation on each side of it in an economy where people talk about how we can't build enough houses fast enough, houses cost too much, we're using too many materials to build things. Thinking about it strictly from that assembly perspective, in my belief, flies in the face of those three much bigger goals.
Mike?
So I want to describe the photographs that he sent in, and because I've done this before. It's the Canadian method for installing this 6 mil poly on the inside of the walls. They're using it as a vapor barrier. They're also using it as an air control layer, and they apply Black Death, otherwise known as Tremco sealant, which is it's an acoustical sealant, which is gooey and sticky and black, and it gets on everything. And it's applied to every stud, every plate, down to the floor sheathing below, and then up kind of convoluted into the ceiling. And then all the joints in the plastic are taped. It is an extremely time-consuming and messy process. So I can see why he doesn't like the idea of having the two, or doing an outside and an inside. But from the building science perspective, and we can't get lost in this, is you really only need one air control layer. Pick what you're going to do and then do it. It can be the exterior sheathing. It could be OSB or plywood with the tape joints, or it could be this plastic on the inside. But you don't need to think about the inside, the outside, the hot, the cold, and all that. I think when he's discussing this hot-cold line and putting out insulation on the outside of the air control layer and on the inside, you can almost ignore the air control layer. All we have to think about is, what is the condensing surface? So what is a possible condensing surface, and where is it in that sandwich of insulation? And in a very cold climate, like you get in climate 6, 7, or 8, it is a good idea to have some exterior insulation on the outside of a potential condensing surface, like exterior wall sheathing, and then have insulation on the inside. But it's not the only way. I think there's so many details in this building science sandwich of a wall, and so many different possibilities, that people get confused. And I like the way Ben described it to you, Ian. It's like, don't get too bogged down in all the building science part of it. If you've got some ventilation on the inside, you control the humidity, and then you've got insulation in there, you're probably going to be a lot safer, especially if you've got that vented rain screen and you allow the moisture vapor to move to the outside, and then anything from the outside to move in. It can dry in both directions. I can go on, but I think that you're overthinking it.
Stick with the fundamentals and the things that work, and don't misapply some of the science.
The key aspect.
Do you guys think this is
air control, I guess?
I'm sorry, Mike. What'd you say?
I say the key thing, though, is you need to have some air control. Air leakage is the biggest problem. People get fixated on vapor control, and most of your vapor control can be done with an air barrier. You're just stopping air from leaking through the building, because it's where you get the air leaks, is where you're going to get some condensation due to the moisture piggybacking on the air. So if you seal the air leaks, then you're going to reduce the potential for moisture to be finding its way into a wall cavity and then condensing.
I want to talk a little bit about air leaks. One thing that really helped with my understanding of the problem, or how to solve the problem of air leaks, was Tamsin Sterner, a building science luminary. And she says that an air leak isn't an air leak unless there's a pressure difference. And that's why you don't need two air barriers on your wall assembly. You only need one. Because if you have a hole on the other side, let's say the drywall layer or the sheathing layer, depending on where the air barrier is, there's no pressure difference because that air can't go anywhere. So I think once you get your head around that, it makes why you don't need two air barriers or a fully sealed cavity make sense. Is that helpful to you guys? Do you think that is?
I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
What do you think about this as an academic exercise? Does it make sense to have a wall assembly that's right for all places?
No.
No? Why do you say that, Ian?
I think it's a folly to even think that you could do that when you have, what climate 6 is like on an island like Nova Scotia, compared to climate 6 where Andrew lives in Minneapolis or inland area like that. You're going to do something totally different in Nova Scotia than you would in Minneapolis, and then you're going to do something totally different in British Columbia. So to think that you can tackle that with one wall assembly to rule them all is just it's a waste of time.
There are a lot of good
I
resources.
picked 3 of the things from the show for the episode title, and I think one wall assembly to rule them all should be one of the
got to
my
watch it.
picks.
I've quoted movies before and had the Fine Homebuilding editorial police come after me and change titles of articles.
Because you were plagiarizing titles of existing
No,
material.
I was appropriating other, pop culture references.
Anyone got any more thoughts on this? I think it's a really interesting question. I would also like to point out that Nova Scotia looks like a very challenging place to build houses. Can I get some agreement on that? Did you guys see the conditions he was dealing with?
Mike, you were nodding when I was going through that rant. What's your take on the differences just within the same climate zones?
I agree 100% because we put these climate zones which stretch from East Coast to West Coast, whether you're in the US or in Canada. And then we might have a dividing line somewhere in the middle where there might be a dry and then a wet. But other than that, they're completely different building environments and different local knowledge about how to make things work. And you gotta nod to everything and investigate. I think there are a lot of good resources on Green Building Advisor, as well as buildingscience.com. And I think a lot of people, builders and homeowners included, and listeners of the podcast, because we talk about all of these assemblies from time to time, air sealing and vapor control and all of that. There's just so much information out there, and it's hard to make sense of it all because you fixate on one little part of it, you lose the other pieces and parts, and it's a very dynamic situation. So you got to really read a lot of information before all of a sudden you'll have that aha moment. Like that little tip that you got, Patrick, about think about it this way. If there's no pressure difference, then you don't have a problem. But it's those little nuggets that are packed into long articles and videos, but finding those and culminating into some, some semblance in your head so it makes sense is where you got to get to for anybody, I think.
I think, Ian, you alluded to it, resource efficiency. Like we don't need to make crazy insulated houses everywhere. We just don't have enough material, and we need more housing for more people, right?
Material or time, all of it. We don't have it to do that level of work.
Jeff, do you think there would ever be a reason that the IRC, for example, would want to have maybe not the same insulation levels, but a similar assembly that made it easier for folks to know how to build houses?
I mean, this is so far over my head, and because I pick up stuff when we're doing these, and I take a piece from here and a piece from there, and they don't necessarily fit together, and I want to do it all, but that doesn't make sense. And I think what Ian said that Ben Bogey told him makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And and what you just said about the idea of you don't have an air leak unless there's a pressure differential makes a lot of sense, and that's something I had not heard before or really thought about. And
the brand Fine Homebuilding is talking about a building science basics department for the magazine and website to answer these kinds of questions, like what is the basic knowledge you need to understand most of the mechanisms that are going on in houses. Of course, there's always going to be weird scenarios based on individual conditions, but generally speaking, there are some rules to follow that can predict how buildings will behave in most cases, right? Except for occupant behavior is always the wild card.
Indeed.
That's another one of those themes. Occupant behavior is the wild card, right? I'm going to write that down right now.
I think Mike is probably a expert in occupant behavior with the amount of different renters he's had over the course of his life.
Is that true, Mike? Do people do weird stuff in your rental properties?
Well, it's not just, they do. And just noticing, even when we get called in, we're going to look at a prospective client, whether we're doing a kitchen remodel or re-roofing their house. And then you realize all of the things that homeowners do that you just go, you shake your head, because the problems that they describe ancillary to the work that we've been asked to do, they say, oh yeah, I've always had this problem with such and such. And then you realize that it's rooted in how they've been utilizing their bathroom, their kitchen, their basement, whatever. Hanging carpets on the walls in their basement because they like to display them. And then all of a sudden they're getting mold on them and they're wondering, why is that happening? Occupants. If we could get, wouldn't houses be great if we didn't have to live in them and you didn't have people living in them? They work perfectly, just the way we design them.
That is the problem. People live in them and build them. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a good question, and I'm hoping you guys remember this conversation from podcast past, but Hyland writes in, good afternoon, nerds. I'm looking for an indoor air quality monitor for my family, and one that I can recommend to clients. We've had an unusually wet winter here in Northern California, and our indoor humidity is higher than typical. I'm monitoring that with a few devices, but would like to monitor CO2 and VOCs as well. Radon is not an issue in our area. I recall you talking about the AirThings monitor in one of your previous podcasts. Thanks in advance, and be cool, nerds. Hyland. Ian, did you grab your air quality monitor there? Oh man, there you go. What is that guy?
So this is an Inkbird Plus, which comes from that gigantic website that sells everything. And I got this for Christmas and specifically asked for it because, one, we have a gas stove, a 5-burner large range that my wife uses like someone who knows how to use a 5-burner gas stove. And then we also put in our gas heating stove for just ambient heat. And I wanted to know what the air quality was like in the house. We have a ventilator that we have an HRV that I can adjust each motor independently. So there's a lot of things I can do to either create negative pressure, positive pressure within the house. So I like to nerd out with this. If she's, making a big meal and she's got all 5 burners going, I'll take it and I'll put it all in different parts of the house and see what the air quality is. And it was really interesting to me to find that if she has the range hood on high, which I believe for our range hood is 600 CFM, and she's doing 3 burners worth of cooking, we maintain within the the green line on this one, which is a 0 to 50 AQI rating. We stay within that, which is the air being good for occupants' health. And this one also has ratings for temperature, humidity, micron particles 2.5, and then 10. So it will tell you the amount of those size particles in the air. And it's interesting to watch how the numbers change during cooking or having a heating appliance on. And I would add, I've put it in my mechanical room as well while our gas boiler is going for hot water and for our in-floor heat, just to see what it's doing to the indoor air quality in there. And I've been really happy with the performance of all of our ventilation equipment and other heating equipment.
Mike, Jeff, thoughts?
Well, I've got a number of AirThings monitors in different places in my house, and they're all a lot of the same readings, but mine also does radon, which is something I was interested in, and I'm finding surprised at the differences in the different parts of the house. And surprisingly, this room, I have one of them, and this is the highest, which surprises me.
For radon?
Yeah.
And it's on the second floor?
Yeah.
Whoa. Do you have your granite specimen collection in there or something?
I really have no idea why that is. And, I mean, obviously this is an area where I focus on I'm here 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. But so, I can watch the CO2 go up and down. Like it's going to spike now because I've got the door closed. But the radon eludes me.
Yeah. It must be an air leak. Am I right? It's got to be moving from the basement, right?
I think, yeah.
I wonder if sometimes some of the sensors will actually pick up some other elements that are in the room, and then they register as the radon or something else. I've had that happen I have these gas leak detectors that we use they're not monitors, they're actual detectors when we're trying to find something, a gas leak in some piping. And sometimes things like if somebody's peeling onions in the kitchen and we bring the monitor in, all of a sudden it goes nuts. And it's just the gas from an onion. So maybe you have some onions in that room, or you had some breakfast, and that's causing the radon sensor to read something that isn't really there. I don't know how to verify that, but.
So
Jeff has a side job of peeling garlic, and that's what his hands are doing when we can't see them.
Ian, does your monitor measure, what is it, 2.5? What is that measurement, please?
The
particulate.
Particulate matter 2.5 micron, and then it's a UG per meter cubed, whatever that would be. But I just know that on this specific one, I think 12 or 15 is the number or less for 2.5. And then I want to say the 10 is like 25, maybe I looked up, and kind of keep an eye on those. But yeah.
It's an interesting subject, and I can tell you in the decades I've been doing this, it has only recently really come into the forefront of concerns. Like this was just something we did not pay attention to, I would say, a few years ago in my observation. So it's very interesting.
What's interesting to me with all the stuff about gas stoves, and that's really in the zeitgeist that people are writing about. I think so much of it comes down to proper ventilation, because I can set this monitor next to the gas stove. I can turn 2 burners on, and yes, if I don't have the range hood on, the air quality gets very bad very fast. But if you have proper ventilation, just like we were talking about with wall assemblies in the inside of a house, your ventilation should be clearing out that air. And I do have makeup air coming in with a damper for that range hood as well. So it is pulling in more fresh air as it's exhausting cooking gas.
Just to throw gas on the fire, pardon the pun there, but I learned from Ben Bogey, there are compounds released when you like superheat a pan and stir fry something, and I want to say they are some kind of VOC. You're nodding like you know what I'm talking about, Ian. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, just the act of cooking releases so much different particulate matter and gases into the atmosphere around, regardless of if it's an induction pan or an electric stove or whatever it is. I mean, we have when my wife gets a new fancy cast iron pan, the first time it's in the oven with something, you can smell all kinds of nastiness coming off of it that's getting cooked off to the point where she kind of runs like a cleaning bake on most of this cast iron cookware to knock that off. But you can immediately tell it's like, oh, that's a new pan in there, isn't it?
Well, to sum up the show, we have this new segment, Ask Our Listeners Questions, and I came up with a good one, and I'll ask you guys to briefly come up with yours if you have them. But I want to know if you've experienced small project discrimination, because I think that's just like the best... It is the best description of what we're talking about, right? It's hard for contractors to do a small project, especially when folks want to save elements of their small project and make it harder. So I would love to hear about your experiences with that. Mike, do you have a question for our listeners?
I do
Nope.
not.
Ian?
Yeah. as we're coming up here into the month of March, I don't know exactly when this is going to come out, but we're fast approaching the 1-year anniversary of our good friend Andy Engel's passing. And I wanted to throw out there a question that I would like to hear from people about others who have affected their life and career in the same way that Andy did to many of us.
Great question. Jeff, do you have any thoughts or questions?
Well, because the script that was questions for homeowners, was that the... Yeah. So I
Sure.
was thinking about, like, you know, have you ever had a project, you know, where the contractor discovers something nobody was expecting and it spins wildly out of control?
Oh boy, I can't wait to hear those.
That's a good one.
That's fantastic. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Ian, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building.